When planning to build a nuclear power plant, any morally responsible design team considers two key factors: physical space and low population density. Ukraine satisfies both of this criteria perfectly. Despite being the second largest European country in terms of land mass, Ukraine is only the 8th largest in terms of population. This, combined with its proximity to Russia, made Soviet Ukraine a prime atomic state candidate. In 1970, approximately 110 kilometers north of Kiev, construction began on the Vladimir I. Lenin nuclear power plant. Due to design flaws, operator errors, and Soviet cost-cutting measures, a series of events transpired in the early hours of April 26, 1986, that would ensure that the town of Chernobyl would be forever etched into the pages of history. Following the catastrophic failure of Reactor 4 in April 1986, a somewhat arbitrary 30-kilometre exclusion zone was enforced around the Chernobyl province. Due to the mandatory 1986 evacuation, the exclusion zone and the settlements within it have remained abandoned since the late 1980s. In 2011, the Ukrainian authorities opened the exclusion zone to tourists. This allows a glimpse into Soviet life in the now abandoned atomic ghost towns littered throughout the zone. Whilst located within Ukraine, the Chernobyl disaster also had significant, devastating and lasting impacts on neighbouring Belarus. Due to the weather conditions in the days following April 26, 1986, Belarus received large amounts of radioactive fallout and contamination. Because of the such high volumes of contamination and the now iconic landmarks within the Ukrainian portion of the zone, tourists tend to visit the Ukrainian sectors rather than the Belarusian portions of the zone. As seems common with most tours and operators, my journey to the exclusion zone began in Kiev city centre. Here we met our guide for the day, collected our Geiger counters and took the approximate 2-hour drive north to the borders of the zone. The high-rise apartment blocks of Kiev quickly evolved into much smaller dwellings before giving way to large open fields and a more farm-based approach. In Kiev city centre, Geiger counters read approximately 0.2 microsievert per hour. For reference, the accepted upper limit for a Western European city is 0.3 microsieverts per hour. Driving through the vast open plains of the Kiev Oblast region, suddenly something looms on the horizon. It looks like a roadblock. Welcome to the Dytyatky checkpoint. Dytyatky is one of the many checkpoints at the outermost edge of the zone. I try to take some pictures as we approach, using the zoom of my camera to get a closer look. My guide asks me to put the camera away, as no photographs are to be taken of the service personnel that man the zone's borders. My passport is checked against my pre-arranged zone entry permit, a personal dosimeter is issued, and access to the zone is granted through a checkpoint. It is at this checkpoint that I have one of my first meetings with one of the many dogs that still roams the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone to this day. The dogs are most commonly found at checkpoints in high traffic areas throughout the zone, as these see the most people and people equal food. Having passed the gates, we are now within the zone, a strangely surreal feeling. The Geiger counter reads between 0.15 and 0.17 microsievert per hour at the checkpoint and the fringes of the zone. Surprisingly, this is less than Kiev city centre, despite being approximately 80 kilometers closer to a compromised nuclear reactor core. It wasn't until now, looking out the windows of my vehicle driving through the zone, that I realised what was lurking behind the tree line. Rows and rows of abandoned houses, settlements and buildings. The first real taste of what was about to come in the day ahead. Our journey continued onwards to Chernobyl town, stopping at the ornate town denomination sign. Radiation reads approximately 0.18 microsieverts per hour here. Despite creeping ever closer, background radiation still remains less than central Kiev. A short drive later, we arrive at the first of the many sites that quantify the scale of the accident. This memorial is a collection of village demarcation signs, with each sign marking an individual settlement that was lost to the liquidation efforts following the disaster. The scale of this memorial was difficult to truly capture accurately on camera. Residing within the exclusion zone, Chernobyl town is officially considered a ghost town. Despite this, a small number of people still reside in houses here as part of those that resettled following the evacuation. Workers on shift and administrative personnel of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone are stationed within this town on a long-term rotational basis.
On your right hand side is a post office with telecommunication center. On your left hand side, administration, last statue of Lenin in official Ukraine, local community center, and offices. All over this town you can see many pipelines above the ground. It is running water and heat system. So before the accident, all pipes were buried, like normal town. But the system which is underground became too old and new was built above. It is much more efficient. They don't care about aesthetic much. So when the workers come here to work, they were provided with free accommodation, transportation, food for free, each double canteen, and they don't pay for bills, electricity and heat. The medical center. Everyone who works here has to pass strict medical examination once a year or twice a year. Depends on locations.
Yeah.
Where do they work? Grocery store. Upstairs is a bar. And on your right hand side is fire station.
Whilst driving through Chernobyl town, some roads are clear, whilst others are heavily blocked by debris and overgrowth. The general rule of thumb is that if the road is clear, someone, be this a worker or resettler, lives in this street or area. Whilst the vast majority of smaller buildings are abandoned, there are a number of amenities still operating within Chernobyl town, such as churches, shops and hotels. These hotels are for tourists who are on a multi-day tour of the zone. After leaving Chernobyl town, the drive continued to the Chernobyl seaport. This was one of the many sites that those familiar with the zone will be accustomed to seeing in photographs of those who've previously visited the zone before then. This shipyard was originally built as a repair base for steamships. Following the accident, it became a naval maintenance and supply base. The boats now residing at the seaport were contaminated with radiation following the accident. Some were used in the subsequent liquidation efforts, but others were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Gradually being cut up for scrap over the many years since the accident, few now remain. Due to the time constraints, we simply observed the boats from afar, rather than venturing closer. Our last stop before lunch was one of the smaller vehicle graveyards located within Chernobyl town. Each of the vehicles located here were actually used during the liquidation efforts of Reactor 4 and the surrounding areas. Although these vehicles have been decontaminated before being displayed, they still emit a significant enough radiation profile that warrants them being out of arm's reach of visitors. Whilst this graveyard is nothing in comparison to the now infamous but dismantled larger graveyards of the zone, the tangibility and closeness of these vehicles was a humbling experience. The time was approaching midday. It was time for lunch. The venue, Dytyatky Hotel in Chernobyl town. Despite the language barrier, the staff were friendly and helpful, and the food was delicious. All food and water supplies are brought in from outside the zone, and whilst I fully trusted our guide and hosts, having a Geiger counter nearby provided some reassuring comfort. Fed and watered, it was now time to begin the real exploration of the zone. Our first stop, the Dytyatky radar array, commonly known as the Russian woodpecker.